And is that if you just if you go to like some random kid on the street and he could, introduces himself as Blood Dagger, you might be like, hmm,
Hmm.
maybe not talk to this. Don't
I
talk
have
to this kid.
questions.
Yeah.
Where are your parents?
Welcome to DM Discretion. I'm Sunny,
And I'm Arthur.
and we're from Cantrip Games. And this is a show where we speak to DMs about just how they do what they do, all the inner workings behind the DM screen. And today we're going to be talking about how we create an NPC. Now, the first question we always have to ask ourselves, why is this NPC going to show up?
Which is such a good point, right? Because we always have NPCs for lots of different reasons. They're in there for the narrative, side quests. They're in there for generic stuff that the players just need, right? Like shopkeepes, taverns, smiths, and a large lot of the world kind of means nothing until you've got people in it. You can't have a village without villagers.
Mm, exactly. You need somebody for the players to stop in the street and ask questions.
Yeah, especially random questions like,
Exactly.
why is there a big sun on the top of your church? That's a really good question that comes up.
Random guy on the street's just going to know, you know.
Yep, random guy knows everything.
You know, they're a very, very handy way of delivering plot points, your hooks, your narrative, your quests. I mean, every RPG needs a quest giver, right? You need to have that person that you're doing the job for, or needs to tell you that they're in trouble, um,
Yeah,
because they're the ones that's going to give you the reward afterwards.
and players like rewards.
So, with all that, then, how much preparation do you think a DM needs to sort of put into making their NPCs?
Well, yeah, it's all about what the NPC's for and how important they are. Like if they're for a story narrative point, or they're for like a particular combat encounter, they're for like an arc or a nemesis for your players. Like it's really what they're for that you'll go, right, this they need a full backstory, they need
Mm,
relationships, they need a job, they might even need a character sheet. Or they might just be there for immersion, bringing the space to life. You might just need some kids running around and being happy in a playground, or you might have, I don't know, some barkeep wiping down the bar and trying to keep it clean. Like it's
mm.
all about what their intended purpose is and the importance of them.
Yeah, because of importance can mean different things to different people as well. Because you'll have people that are important to the story. Maybe this is the leader of the organization that you work for, or the person who hired you, or or even the big bad himself, but potentially. Or they could just be important to your players. Like, for example, it could be a parent or a brother in arms or a mentor or something like that. So, those could be completely irrelevant to the story, but important to your players specifically. What I like to do is sort of create an illusion of choice with NPCs. So if I want to deliver a plot hook, and I don't want to sort of tell the players, oh, you have to go speak to that person right over there. If you don't, the whole thing gets
Yeah,
derailed.
yeah,
You know,
lot of risk.
um, yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, what I would do is say, well, if you could talk to these three people. You see three very interesting people in front of you. They can then choose which of those three people they want to talk to. But then in the back of your mind, you'd be like, well, no matter who you pick, you're getting this plot point. They may be slightly different in the way you do it, but you're gonna get it. So the player feels like they haven't been railroaded, but secretly in the back of from your mind, they are. Um,
You haven't risked the entire campaign you've prepared.
yeah,
You pushed them in the general right
yeah.
direction.
We've all seen the meme where the DM has to just throw his plot off the screen. But there are ways to mitigate
Yeah.
that. You can mitigate it. It's if need be.
Yeah, like uh enemy NPCs, bandits. You might have a combat encounter that, you may want it to be more than just a regular combat encounter. Maybe there's a little bit more to it. Maybe the bandit leader is a nemesis of one of your players. Maybe the bandit leader is a noble that ran away from home and your knight player actually was guarding him before he left
Mm,
for this adventure. Like it could be lots of things you could pull in, and the importance of them really brings about how much you can flesh them out or want to flesh them out.
yeah, and you don't. Not every NPC needs to be relevant to anything. You know, People by their very nature are boring. They literally just could be a 9 to 5 family man, goes to the pub every evening. Like that's it. That's the extent of them. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone has to be important. Because if everyone's important, nobody is. Um,
Very true.
so if so, say you've done all that and you've prepared at least their thoughts and motivations and everything. How do you go about naming them? Because players hook themselves to names.
I mean, yeah, there's lots of options really. I mean, starting with the basis, there's fantasy name generator and is a great thing. And there's multiple versions of them. Like you can generate names on the fly, obviously internet willing. But
Mm,
from if you're not great with names, it's a great resource and definitely use it. I think if you've got an important NPC and you've got the time to really think about their name, like you want something that's easy to remember. Like you're quite good at this. You come up with names that are, you know, I don't want to say short and sweet, but they're definitely memorable in the fact that they're easy to remember.
yeah, that's the thing. It's like if you're gonna, like your big bad, or again like your mentor or whoever, someone they're gonna talk about a lot. You want it to be an easy name, easy to pronounce. It doesn't necessarily have to be easy to spell, but easy to pronounce. Typically 2 or 3 syllables, because nobody wants a big 6 syllable name. It's too hard. And if they did, they would end up shortening it anyway. So yeah, I tend to try and stick to that as best I can, really.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of different techniques you can use to kind of like you can prepare some naming conventions
Hmm.
for like a species or a village or a country. You can say, in this village, it's everyone's name begins with B. And that would be a totally viable thing. Like they're all
Yeah,
Bernards or Bernards or Billies or Bixes. Like it's
yeah,
it's all just beginning with B.
yeah. I mean, I've got one similar, well, naming convention where I'll have a town of robots, and all their names are based on the Latin word of their function. So if they're like a smith, I'll find out what the Latin word for smith is, and then just sort of make a name based off of that, and stuff like that. So it's just like subtly hidden, but there's like a naming convention. But it's easier then for me as a DM because it's like, oh, okay, I need to make a florist. Well, what's the Latin word for flower? Okay, I've got my name. You don't have to think too hard. You've done all the hard work, and that's the biggest thing with naming conventions. To make your life easier.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes you're backed up against the wall, you haven't prepared this NPC at all. They've started talking to someone, and you've got to come up with a name on the fly. Now I'll do stuff like I'll pick a couple objects in the room, I'm looking at a kettle and a lamp, uh, Ket Plample, like that's a name, and
Nice.
that'll work for the time being. But I know you've got something, Sonny. You've got like a really cool generator thing that then then can actually
Yeah,
come up with a name from that, which I definitely need to nick.
yeah. So what I do is I have a letter generator, a sort of random letter generator. It will give me the first letter, the last letter, and a middle letter, basically. From that, I can just generate a name from that. So, say it spits out, I don't know, D, P, and C. I can make Delphic, Dorpanak, and just make them up, because they don't have to be well thought out, especially if it's a throwaway like general NPC. Like it doesn't matter because guarantee you your players are going to ask your random NPC what is your name. Gonna happen.
Yep, every time. And that's the other thing. Like on the flip side, if you're not as creative with names or you don't have a good internet connection for fantasy name generator, and your world is, much like the one we live in now, generic names are fine. Like, medieval times, people just had fairly regular names with their job function. Uh,
Mm,
and Matt does this brilliantly. Matt, the other DM part of Cantrip, has loads of NPCs, and they're all memorable. John the Necromancer,
mm.
Pete the Wizard, Joan the Smith. Like these are all viable names that your players will find easy to remember because they're common names that you know.
No, definitely. Like you don't need to overthink it. Honestly, like there's no point making your job harder than it needs to be because a DM's job is already quite difficult.
Yeah,
But then leading on to that, we have probably the hardest job for
oh,
when it comes to NPCs. How do you bring your NPC to life? How do you make them feel like an interesting, real person within your world?
and and this is a tough subject because obviously, like everybody's got different sort of ways of presenting or
Mm,
DMing, and this really can come down to DM style. But I'm going to say we look at this from sort of two segments. Like it's all about the NPC's presence, and it's all
mm,
about the NPC's communication.
mm,
So for presence, it could be how they talk, how they move. It could be a facial trait that the players know about because you tell them, and players only know what you tell them. If I
mm,
say a tall warrior bears a large scar on his cheek in the shape of a G, your players might start to wonder, oh, this guy's got a shape of a G on his face. That's curious. Let's go ask him about it. And, you know, the description of them can all be about their flair, the barkeep wiping down a table with a cloth that you're not really sure is clean, or a smith knocking over a barrel of swords, children with dirty knees uh, running around because they can't bear to stand still,
mm,
and all those little details kind of not just the NPC, but it kind of builds the world around them. It helps
mm,
the immersion. It brings them to life.
paints a picture.
It really paints a picture.
Mm,
And when
no,
it comes
definitely.
to communication, Sonny, you've got some great points on this.
So, for the I mean, communication's a big one because I think it's really boils down to this to your confidence with things like voices. Because voices is a really good way of breathing life into an NPC because that with D&D is a verbal activity, right? The voice is what your players are going to be interacting with the most when it comes to an NPC.
100%.
So
I
yeah,
I love doing voices.
so do I.
I love doing voices.
It is. But the interesting thing is, like, despite me and you probably in cantrip games doing the most voices, me and you have a very different style of for voices. Like you do accents really well. I can't, but I do like inflections. So I'll make my voice like really deep or really squeaky. I can sort of alter my voice in that way. Um, and now not everyone can do that, right? And if I wanted to breathe life into an NPC, I would try to give them a voice. So one thing I do actually is I try to make a voice for sort of the base species. So like, this is why my dragonborn voice. All my dragonborn speak like this. Whereas all my gnomes speak like this.
And that's great because, as well as that, you could literally have a situation where players hear an NPC before they see them. And
Mhm.
if you've built up that habit memory of them going, "Oh, well, they talk like this." It's really squeaky and low, and it must be either a gnome or a goblin or some kind of creature.
Yeah.
And when they talk deep, it's, "Oh, that's a dragonborn. Where are they coming from?"
No, exactly. And it's a good way of doing. I mean, and obviously, if that that can be quite difficult to put those voices on. Um, Another thing I will might do is like give them a lisp. They always talk with a lisp. Then that way you're using your own voice. You're not having to mess around with it too much, or have them mispronounce words. I don't know. Maybe they pronounce the all the silent letters of words. So they'll ask for their fork and knife. You know, I don't know anything about that one. And stuff like that. Obviously, they're quite difficult because you have to remember. You know, so that
Okay.
that can be quite tricky to do.
That would be
But
something
again,
to note down. Definitely note that down if
you'd
you
have to
decide to
definitely
do
note
that.
that
Yeah.
down. But it's a lot of thinking on the fly because you have to think about, oh, there's a silent whatever in there. You got to be careful of your purrs, for your things like that. Um, but like, obviously, if that's too much, because it can be, you can just do something very basic, like, I don't know, they really hate pickles, but they keep eating pickles to make sure they don't like them.
Hmm.
You know,
A
um,
comical moment as well. Like
exactly.
it brings up an interesting situation for your players to have to kind of work around because they're trying to ask
Yeah,
someone for information and this guy's just eating pickles and saying he doesn't like them.
you don't have to necessarily be the one driving these things. You can drive this stuff from your players or even from your location or the time of day, for example. So, say you're in the early in the morning, you're near the tavern. Maybe you'll just have a guy who's straggling along, got a hangover, so he's like, "Oh, what were you saying? Give me 5 minutes," kind of thing. Or you could be in the market, in the afternoon, and suddenly you're talking to someone and they just stop your conversation because they forgot to buy eggs and their wife told them they had to buy eggs, so they ran. Stuff like that. You can anything that you can get external factors to make your life easier, the better. Now, sometimes, and I say sometimes, probably a lot of the time, you'll make a random NPC. Could be innocent. It could be a shopkeeper that just happens to be creepy. Does he a lot. Um, and sometimes your players will just gain an unexpected attachment or love for that NPC, and they just keep revisiting them, for example. Now, as a DM, you probably want to be like, well, if you're going to keep talking to this person, you might want to just flesh them out a bit more, like, because they're going to start asking about background. Um, how do you sort of start improvising and sort of building on an NPC sort of on the fly as these situations arise?
Yeah, so something you mentioned, I just want to like bring up. I think if you get like separate visits, like the players are starting to get an interest and they're coming back in between sessions, start building that character out a little
Yes.
bit more and practicing them and that kind of thing. And that's definitely worth
Oh yeah.
doing. If you are stuck in the middle of a session, you've got this random NPC and they really take a driving interest and kind of not quite badger, but definitely overly enthused and interested in talking to this person, you know, what I like to do is I like to stall for time with detail. And what I do is you don't open with too much detail. You sort of make up just a little bit. And then when they start talking, based on the player engagement, you drip feed more information. You give yourself more time as they're
Mhm.
talking to not only answer them, but also come up with a little bit more information. Uh, they approach a dark skinned elf with auburn hair. And then as they're talking to them, they might ask some questions about the local gang, and she might be, unsure. But then as you're talking to her, you notice there's a tattoo on her neck, and the
Mhm.
symbolism is very like the gang that you've been following. And
Mm.
suddenly, that random NPC becomes the plot hook you were planning to give later. Like,
Yeah.
you can slip a lot of stuff in while doing that improv, and it's
Yeah.
really just looking for those moments and kind of allowing the player engagement to give you the time to tweak and add these details to kind of the fuzzy picture you started off with. And the other thing
No,
was the
exactly
like
that.
details on the fly. I mean, we mentioned names earlier. Y- The last time you introduced yourself to anyone with your full name was probably never. So if
Mm,
you're strapped, one word, that's all you need. One word that can be their name, and that's it. Even if you just go like you could go with sort of a pronoun styled thing or a title. You can go, you can call me sir, or you can
mm,
call me madam. Like if they're in a more formal position, like there's lots of ways to kind of escape
yeah.
certain things.
Or you can even do something that's obviously like an alias, like I don't know, Gorehound. That's clearly not their name.
I am
you know,
blood dagger.
yeah, exactly. You just make something up and then worry about what their real name is later. You know,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, you can always, use an NPC as well. Again, if an NPC is being constantly looked at as well, you could always go, well, actually, they like this person so much. I might see if I can actually interweave them into the main plot hook somehow. Obviously, you can do that in a million ways, but that they've actually just liked this person so much. You know what? I'm going to turn this from a random NPC to like
to someone far
an
more
actual important
important
NPC.
because they're more
Yeah,
important to
exactly.
the players, which then makes them more important to
Yeah,
you.
and the thing is, at the end, it is like, and it is about what's fun for the players. Just generally, with obviously being a DM. So if they are attaching themselves to an NPC, don't shy them away from it. Actually, embrace it.
Yeah,
Because they'll love
absolutely.
it when at base, for example, and then suddenly that NPC they all loved turns up. They'll love that.
Yeah.
They'll get excited about that.
They get nostalgic about that. Like it's a nostalgic feeling when something you
Mm,
appreciated before reappears, and you can
mm,
give them that by returning something they loved or they got involved with or they really liked the look of. Like if you can bring stuff back to them, they'll love
yeah,
you for it.
definitely, definitely, and it's something to. I think I find a lot of the time with when you're looking back on D&D campaigns, it's the characters that people remember the most. I
Yeah,
think
100%.
you know. Right, that's all we've got. We're going to have sort of time for this today for DM discretion. Thanks for joining me today, Arthur.
No problem.
And
Happy to be here.
and remember, when in doubt, just make it up.